in this theology spotlight is Paul R. Smith. Paul Smith, a lifelong follower of Jesus, is a mystic, teacher, author, and retired pastor. His first and only pastorate was for 49 years at Broadway Church in Kansas City, Missouri. Smith came to the conservative Southern Baptist Church in 1963, which, after a series of changes, was eventually ejected from the SBC, having evolved into the Progressive Integral Church he has written about in his books. Smith has taught extensively on contemporary spiritual life to many groups, churches, and schools, including St. Paul Methodist School of Theology, Unitary or Unity Ministerial School, and Midwestern Baptist Theological Seminary. He has written numerous publications. The two that will be highlighted here is Integral Christianity, The Spirit's Call to Evolve, and Is Your God Big Enough, Close Enough, You Enough, Jesus and the Three Faces of God. In Integral Christianity, The Spirit's Call to Evolve, this book represents a model of Christianity that incorporates the insights of a Jesus-centered theology of biblical interpretation, integral philosophy, as espoused by Ken Wilber and many others, and over 50 years of pastoral experience in leading evolutionary change in the local church. The perspectives of integral theory and practice articulated by Ken Wilber help uncover the integral approach that Jesus advocated and demonstrated in the metaphors of his time, and that traditional Christianity has largely been unable to see. Smith incorporates elements of traditional, modern, and postmodern theological viewpoints, including progressive, some new thought, and emergent ones. However, he goes beyond all of them and moves to a Christianity that is devoted to following both the historical Jesus and the risen Christ, whose Spirit beckons to us from the future. Smith says, quote, "The oldest thing you can say about God is that God is always doing something new. Jesus pushed his own religion to newness by including the best of its past and transcending the worst of its present. He calls us to do the same, whatever our religion is today." I'm highlighting these two publications on the basis that they are indeed similar to panentheistic thought, as well as open relational and process theological inspection. And Is Your God Big Enough, which brings to mind the panentheist idea that of size and location of the divine, or the ultimate, or what religions call God. Moving from atheism or to deism to pantheism to theism to panentheism in relationship to size and location. So this fits well with the concept of God increasing in size and perhaps influence size meaning his presence within the world. Within the panentheistic metaphysic, of course, the world, in fact the entire universe, is located within God, all in God. That is the basic premise of panentheism. So with that said, and is your God big enough, close enough, you enough? Jesus and the three faces of God, Paul Smith, with foreword by Richard Rohr and afterword by Ken Wilber, which collaborated. This book provides an integral exploration of God, Jesus, and the Bible that provides a new unifying framework for Christian consciousness in our contemporary world. So it builds on the concept of a unified view, which is emphasized within panentheism, or specifically symbiotic panentheism, as espoused by Daniel J. Shepard, which is a large portion of this particular format. The bigger, closer, and more human God of Jesus, hidden behind the traditional Trinity, is God beyond us, God beside us, and God being us. Divine consciousness, in all its modes, here is a God who is big enough for our minds, close enough for our hearts, and us enough, as the mystics have maintained, unity and oneness with God, us enough for and as our deepest identity. This book is magnificent. Reverend Smith, or Pastor Smith, in clear contemporary yet biblically grounded language, explains the spiritual essence of Jesus' teachings and therefore of Christianity, namely integral Christianity, better than any writer I have ever read. I recommend the book to every Christian and to all spiritual seekers, whatever tradition you're grounded in. From Jim Marion, author of Putting on the Mind of Christ, The Inner Work of Christian Spirituality. Pastor or Reverend Paul Smith's book, Is Your God Big Enough, Close Enough, You Enough, is a spiritual jewel. His impressive erudition combined with a lifetime of deep spiritual experience provide profound and useful guidance for each reader's personal journey. Building on Ken Wilber's insights on the three faces of spirit, Smith convincingly demonstrates what it means to feel the presence of God. This delightful book is both theologically sophisticated and pragmatically accessible. I highly recommend this important contribution to evolutionary spirituality. Steve McIntosh, author of The Presence of the Infinite, Evolution's Purpose, and Integral Consciousness. So with the question then being, how big is God? Is your God big enough? And does classical traditional theism adequately explain the God-world relationship? I would say it falls short on many points, as would most process open and relational theologians and mystics alike. And from the panentheist perspective, classical theism has a number of unsolved contradictions that seem to be solved by the pantheistic view of God. Within integral theory, as expounded by Ken Wilber, there is a spiral of development in consciousness and culture which affects what we believe and how we believe it, including our theological perspectives. Within Paul Smith's work, though he focuses on Christianity within these books, assures the reader that the same general path to enhanced spiritual growth can be achieved within other world religions as well, which basically makes it a pluralist model. Religious exclusivity falls short in many ways when held up to integral thought. From the bottom of the spiral to the top, we start with archaic consciousness, tribal consciousness, warrior consciousness, traditional consciousness, mythic consciousness, and all of these are in some ways interwoven. Modernist consciousness, postmodern consciousness, integral consciousness, post-integral consciousness. Those are the basics of the map of consciousness that Wilber and others have espoused within integral theory. I would also add that non-dual awareness or consciousness and dualism consciousness are two specific categories that fit within these levels of consciousness as well. And all of these levels of consciousness contribute to how we think about God and the world that we live in and its relationship to us and others. So, within these two books, Integral Christianity and The Spirit's Call to Evolve and Is Your God Big Enough, is a large contribution to this work. And indeed, I would recommend both books so that one can get perhaps a broader view, and to broaden one's horizons, I would say. Highly recommend them. So, Paul Smith's work is highly influenced by integral philosophy of Ken Wilber, which is another prolific writer, and I would recommend all of his books as well if you want to expand your own consciousness. And perhaps one can move from a particularist theology or belief about God, an exclusivist thought, move beyond that into the higher planes of consciousness, which are able to perhaps see universals as more pertinent to one's belief system. And once again, perhaps see a perceived religious other in a more positive light. rather than demonizing, for instance, Buddhists or Hindus for their beliefs about the God-world relationship.